Let me tell you about a forest that should never have existed, and the price paid by those who dared to enter its shadows. Settle in, turn down the lights, and whatever you do, don't look toward the woods. Before we descend into the darkness together, I invite you to subscribe to this channel so you never miss a tale of terror. And please, leave a comment telling me where in the world you're listening from. I love knowing that these stories reach into corners both near and far, connecting us all through our shared love of the macabre. Let's begin. The autumn fog rolled through the streets of New York like a living thing, thick and gray and smelling of the harbor. It was the kind of fog that made lamplighters curse and tavern keeps smile, knowing men would seek warmth and company rather than navigate the treacherous cobblestones home. But Esther Caldwell paid the fog no mind as she hurried north along the Bowery Lane, her basket clutched tight against her chest, her mind fixed on reaching the woodland edge before full dark. She was 17 years old, dark-haired and serious-faced, the only daughter of Thomas Caldwell, who kept a modest inn near the freshwater pond. Her mother had died bringing her into the world, and her father had raised her with a combination of gruff affection and stern discipline that had produced a young woman both capable and cautious. She could cipher better than most men, could brew ale that kept men coming back, and could read the weather in the color of the sky. But she could not, despite her father's repeated warnings, stay away from the woods. The woods in question lay north of the settled city, beyond the last farms and stone walls, where the land grew wild and dark. They were old woods, older than the Dutch settlers, older than the Lenape who had lived here before them, older perhaps than memory itself. The trees grew thick and tall there, their canopy so dense that even at midday the forest floor lay in perpetual twilight. The locals called it many things: the dark wood, the whispering forest, the old growth. But most often, with a certain tightness around their eyes, they simply called it the Vanishing Wood. For people who went into those woods sometimes did not come out. It had started, so far as anyone could reckon, about 3 years prior. A trapper named John Wickham had gone into the woods to check his lines and never returned. A search party found his rifle propped against a tree, his powder horn beside it, his coat folded neatly on a stone. But of John Wickham himself, there was no trace. His footprints simply stopped, as if he had been plucked from the earth by an invisible hand. After that, others vanished. A pair of children gathering nuts, a young couple who had stolen away for privacy, an old woman who knew the medicinal herbs and had gone to gather bark. Each time, search parties found some small evidence: a basket, a shoe, a neatly arranged pile of belongings, but never the missing person, never so much as a drop of blood or a torn scrap of clothing to suggest violence. The city fathers had declared the woods off limits. The clergy had preached about the dangers of straying from civilization. Mothers frightened their children with stories of wood demons and spirits. But Esther Caldwell, practical and sensible though she was, could not bring herself to fear the forest, because the forest spoke to her, not in words, exactly, more like a feeling, a gentle pull, a whisper at the edge of hearing, a sense of being called home. She had felt it since childhood, this strange affinity for the woods. While other children played at commerce or war, Esther had wandered the forest edge, learning the names of birds and plants, feeling more at peace beneath the canopy than she ever did within the city walls. Her father knew, of course. Thomas Caldwell missed little where his daughter was concerned. He had forbidden her to go into the woods, had lectured her on duty and danger had even threatened to send her to live with her aunt in Philadelphia. But Esther had continued her visits, simply becoming more secretive about them. She told herself it was harmless. She never went deep into the woods, never stayed past dark, never lost sight of the forest edge. She was careful, she was safe. Tonight, she told herself, would be no different. The basket she carried contained bread and cheese wrapped in cloth, not for herself, but for the cats. A colony of feral cats lived at the forest edge, and Esther had been feeding them for months. It was a reasonable excuse for her trips to the woods, one her father grudgingly accepted. If he suspected she ventured beyond the feeding spot, he said nothing. Perhaps he hoped his daughter's good sense would prevail. Perhaps he simply feared that forbidding her outright would drive her to greater recklessness. The last houses fell away behind her. The cultivated fields gave way to rough meadow, then to the dark line of trees. The fog was thinner here, and in the dying light, Esther could see the first stars beginning to appear. She paused at the edge of the meadow, as she always did, and looked back at the city. Lamplight glowed in windows. Smoke rose from chimneys. It looked warm and safe and impossibly distant, though in truth it was less than a mile away. She turned toward the trees. The cats were waiting, as they always were. They materialized from the shadows, gray and orange and black, lean and yellow-eyed. Esther set down her basket and distributed the food, speaking softly to them as they ate. They tolerated her presence but did not seek affection. They were wild things, and they kept their wildness. When the basket was empty, Esther stood. The sensible thing would be to turn back now, to hurry home before full darkness fell. But the pull was stronger tonight than usual. The whispering, that sensation of almost hearing, seemed louder, more urgent. Just a little way, she told herself. Just to the oak tree where she liked to sit. She would stay only a moment. She stepped into the woods. The change was immediate. The sound of the city vanished, as if she had closed a door. The air grew still and cool, smelling of earth and decay, and something else, something green and ancient that had no name. The light dimmed, though enough remained to see by. Esther followed a narrow path that might have been made by deer or might have been made by nothing at all. Her footsteps made no sound on the soft forest floor. The oak tree stood in a small clearing about 50 yards in. It was massive and old, its trunk so wide that 3 men couldn't have joined hands around it. Its roots rose from the earth like the coils of a great serpent. Esther had spent many hours here, reading or simply thinking, feeling a peace she found nowhere else. She was about to sit when she heard the sound. It came from deeper in the woods, a rhythmic tapping, like someone striking wood with wood. Tap, tap, tap. Pause. Tap, tap, tap. It was steady and deliberate, unmistakably made by human hands. Esther froze, her heart suddenly racing. No one came into these woods. No one except her. And she had never encountered another soul. Tap, tap, tap. Curiosity warred with caution. She should leave. She should run back to the meadow, to the city, to safety. But the sound was oddly compelling, and besides, perhaps someone was in trouble. Perhaps someone was lost and signaling for help. She moved toward the sound. The tapping continued, always seeming to come from just ahead, just out of sight. Esther picked her way carefully through the undergrowth, ducking beneath low branches, stepping over fallen logs. The light grew dimmer. She should mark her path, she thought. She should turn back. But the tapping drew her on. After what might have been 10 minutes or 30 time felt strange here, she emerged into another clearing. This one was larger, almost perfectly circular, ringed by ancient trees. In the center stood a structure that made her breath catch. It was a house, or the skeleton of one. The frame stood complete, timber walls rising to support a peaked roof, but there were no windows, no door, no shingles or boards to close it in. It was as if someone had begun to build a house and then stopped, leaving only the bones. The wood was dark with age, covered in moss and hanging vines. It should have collapsed long ago, yet it stood straight and true, defying decay. And someone was working on it. A figure stood before the frame, hammer in hand, tapping at a joint. The sound echoed through the clearing. Tap, tap, tap. As Esther watched, the figure paused, examined its work, then moved to another beam and began again. "Hello?" Esther called, her voice barely above a whisper. The figure stilled. Then, slowly, it turned. It was a man, or had been. He wore clothing from another era. Leather breeches, a simple shirt, a leather apron. His face was lean and weathered, neither young nor old, with dark eyes that reflected the failing light. He looked at Esther without surprise, as if he had been expecting her. "Good evening," he said. His voice was soft and oddly formal. "You should not be here. I heard you working," Esther said, taking a cautious step closer. "Are you building something?" The man looked at the frame, then back at her. "I am building my house. I have been building it for a very long time. It's quite far along," Esther said, though even as she spoke, she felt foolish. "The house was just a frame, nothing more. I cannot finish it," the man said. There was no emotion in his voice, just simple statement of fact. "I have tried. For longer than you could imagine, I have tried, but I cannot finish it." "Why not? Why not? Why not? Why not?" "Because I am dead." The words hung in the air between them. Esther felt a chill that had nothing to do with the cooling evening. She should run, she thought. She should flee this place and never return. But her feet would not move. "If you're dead," she said, trying to keep her voice steady, "then what are you?" "I am what remains," the man said. "I am the echo of what I was. I am the house I never finished, the life I never completed. I am trapped here, between one world and the next, building and building and never done." He set down his hammer with great care and stepped toward her. Esther wanted to step back, but found she could not. "You hear it, don't you?" he said. "The calling, the whisper. You feel the pull of this place." "Yes," Esther whispered. "That is because you belong here," the man said. "Not now, perhaps, but someday. This is a place of unfinished things, you see, of people who left something undone, who have some great work incomplete. The woods gather them. The woods keep them, and they stay here, trying to finish what they started, forever and ever and ever. The missing people," Esther breathed. "They're all here. They are here," the man agreed. "Still trying, still working, still caught between done and undone. But I haven't. I'm not." Esther struggled to form the thought. "I haven't left anything unfinished." The man smiled, and it was the saddest thing Esther had ever seen. "Haven't you? Think carefully, girl. Is there nothing you've begun and not completed? No promise unmade? No path not taken? No word not spoken?" Esther's mind raced. There were 1,000 things, Of course, small tasks, minor commitments, the usual debris of daily life, but nothing significant, nothing that would. And then she remembered. Her mother. She had died giving birth to Esther, and Esther's father had never spoken of her, not really. He kept a miniature portrait locked in a drawer, but Esther had only glimpsed it once as a child. She didn't know her mother's name, or what she had loved, or what she had dreamed. For 17 years, Esther had meant to ask, to press her father for information, to know the woman who had given her life. And, for 17 years, she had put it off, waiting for the right moment, afraid to cause her father pain. That story was unfinished. That connection was incomplete. "No," Esther said, stepping backward. "No, I won't. I can't." "Not yet," the man said gently. "But someday, when you are ready, when what is undone weighs heavy enough, then you will hear the calling, and you will come back, and you will stay. That is how it works. That is how it has always worked." "I'll never come back," Esther said, still backing away. "I won't. I'll forget this place. You cannot forget," the man said, "any more than you can stop hearing or stop breathing. The woods are patient. The woods will wait." Esther turned and ran. She crashed through the undergrowth, branches clawing at her clothes and skin, her breath coming in ragged gasps. She had no idea if she was going the right direction. The woods all looked the same in the darkness, and full night had fallen while she spoke with the fours. Dead man. She ran until her legs burned and her lungs ached, expecting at any moment to burst into the meadow to see the lights of the city. But there was only forest. Dark and endless forest. Panic seized her. She was lost. She was trapped. She would wander here until she died, and then she would stay. Just another unfinished thing, trying desperately to complete what could never be completed. She opened her mouth to scream and heard her father's voice, "Esther." It came from ahead and to the left, barely audible, but unmistakable. She ran toward it, heedless now of thorns or branches. The trees thinned. She saw lantern light, blessed and real. She burst from the forest into the meadow and nearly collided with her father. Thomas Caldwell caught her as she stumbled. He was a big man, made bigger by fear and relief. Behind him stood half a dozen men from the city, carrying lanterns and ropes and the grim determination of a search party. "Thank God," her father said, holding her tight. His voice shook. "Thank God. When you didn't come home, when it got dark. I'm sorry." Esther sobbed against his chest. "I'm sorry. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry." They walked back to the city together, the men forming a protective circle around them. Esther looked back only once. The forest stood dark and still, revealing nothing, but she could feel it watching, waiting. That night, in her room above the tavern, Esther lay awake, listening to the sounds of the city, drunken laughter from below, a dog barking, the watch calling the hour. Normal sounds, human sounds. She clung to them like a drowning woman clings to driftwood. She would not go back to the woods. She would keep away from that place, no matter how it called. She would finish things, all the little incomplete tasks of her life. She would ask her father about her mother. She would tie up every loose end, leave nothing undone. Then the woods would have no claim on her. Then she would be safe. But even as she made these promises to herself, some deeper part of her knew the truth. The man in the clearing had been right. She belonged to the woods now. Not today, perhaps. Not tomorrow. But someday, when the weight of unfinished things grew too heavy, she would hear the calling, and she would answer, and she would never leave. Outside, in the darkness, the woods waited. The morning after Esther's return dawned cold and bright. Frost sparkled on the cobblestones, and breath plumed white in the November air. In the common room of the Caldwell Inn, a fire crackled in the hearth, and 6 men sat around a long table, their faces grave. Thomas Caldwell stood at the head of the table, his big hands spread flat on the scarred wood. He had not slept. His eyes were red-rimmed, his jaw set in a line that his daughter knew meant he had made a decision and would not be swayed from it. "Gentlemen," he said, his voice rough, "I thank you for coming." The men nodded. They were a varied group, merchants and laborers, young and old. But all had one thing in common. Each had lost someone to the woods. There was Jacob Hart, a wheelwright whose younger brother had vanished 2 years ago. Samuel Reed, a chandler whose daughter had disappeared gathering herbs. William Thorne, a carpenter who had lost his wife. Peter Ashford, a young clerk whose closest friend had gone into the woods on a dare and never emerged. And 2 others, Benjamin Carr and Joseph Mullins, whose losses were older but no less keen. "My daughter came back," Thomas continued. "Thank God in His mercy, she came back. But she saw something in those woods, heard something, and what she told me," he paused, collecting himself. "What she told me suggests that our loved ones may yet live in some fashion, that they may be trapped there." "Trapped?" Jacob Hart leaned forward, his weathered face intent. "What manner of trap? Nets? Pits?" "Something worse," Thomas said. He glanced toward the stairs, where Esther remained in her room, still shaken from the previous night. Something unnatural. She spoke of a man, long dead, who nonetheless walked and worked. She spoke of the woods claiming people who have unfinished business. A skeptical murmur ran through the group. Samuel Reed frowned. "With respect, Thomas, the girl was frightened and lost in the dark. The mind plays tricks in such circumstances. She may have seen nothing more than shadows. And she saw something," Thomas interrupted, his voice hard. "Something real enough to send her running in blind terror. Something that knew things about her, about all of us, that no living soul could know. I believe her, and I mean to find out the truth." "You mean to go into the woods?" William Thorne said. "It was not a question. I do, and I'm asking if any of you will come with me." Silence filled the room. The fire popped and hissed. Outside, a cart rumbled past on the cobblestones. Finally, Jacob Hart spoke. "If there's even a chance my brother lives, I'll come." "And I," said Samuel Reed, though his face was pale. One by one, the others agreed. They would go into the vanishing wood. They would search for their lost loved ones. They would, if necessary, confront whatever darkness dwelt there. "We'll need supplies," Peter Ashford said, his clerk's mind already organizing. "Rope, lanterns, oil, provisions for several days. Weapons, perhaps." "No weapons," Thomas said firmly. "If what Esther described is true, steel and powder will avail us nothing. This is not an enemy we can fight in the normal way." "Then how do we fight it?" Benjamin Carr asked. Thomas had no answer for that. They spent the morning preparing. Each man went home to settle his affairs and gather what he needed. Thomas took Esther aside. finding her in her room, staring out the window at the distant tree line. "I want you to stay with your aunt," he said. "I've arranged for John Pritchard to take you to Philadelphia tomorrow." "No," Esther said without turning from the window. "Esther, you're going into the woods because of me," she said, finally facing him. Her eyes were red but dry. She had no tears left. "Because I was fool enough to ignore your warnings. Because I let that place pull me in. I won't hide while you risk your life to save you," Thomas finished. "That's what fathers do, child." "I'm not a child," Esther said, "and you can't save me from this." "That man, the dead man," he said, "I belong there. That someday I'll go back. You can't change that. Watch me," Thomas said grimly. He left her there and descended to find the men gathering in the common room. They had brought rope and lanterns as discussed, but also, despite his instructions, several knives and a brace of pistols. Thomas said nothing. If it made them feel safer, let them carry what they wished. They set out at midday, 7 men walking north from the city. Neighbors watched from windows and doorways. Word had spread, as it always did, and people knew where they were headed. Some made signs against evil. Others simply looked sad, as if the men were already lost. The walk to the forest edge took less than an hour. The day was fine, cold but clear, the sky a hard blue. It seemed wrong somehow that the weather should be so pleasant for such grim business. The men spoke little, each lost in his own thoughts. At the meadow's edge, they paused. The woods stood before them, dark and silent. No birds sang, no wind stirred the branches. It was as if the forest itself was holding its breath. "We stay together," Thomas said. "No matter what, we mark our path as we go, and we don't separate. Agreed?" The men nodded. They entered the woods. The change was just as Esther had described. The moment they passed the tree line, the sound of the world cut off. Their footsteps made no noise. Even their breathing seemed muffled. The air was cool and still, smelling of rot and earth. Samuel Reed pulled out a knife and made a mark on a tree trunk. "So we can find our way back," he said, his voice strangely flat in the deadened air. They walked in single file, Thomas in the lead, Peter Ashford at the rear. Every few yards, Samuel stopped to mark another tree. The forest was dense, but not impassable. A narrow path, or something like a path, wound between the massive trunks. The light was dim, that perpetual twilight Esther had mentioned, but enough to see by. After perhaps half an hour, William Thorne stopped abruptly. "Do you hear that?" he whispered. They all heard it. A sound like singing, distant and mournful, the words too faint to make out. It seemed to come from deeper in the woods. "That's Sarah," William breathed. "That's my wife's voice. I'd know it anywhere." "Don't," Thomas warned, but William was already pushing past him, moving toward the sound. "Sarah," he called. "Sarah, I'm here." The other men rushed after him. The singing grew louder, but no clearer. Always, seeming to come from just ahead, William crashed through the undergrowth, heedless of thorns and branches. The others followed, trying to catch him, to pull him back. The woods opened into a clearing. A woman stood in the center, her back to them, wearing a simple gray dress. Her hair hung long and dark down her back. She was singing a hymn Thomas recognized, one often sung at funerals. "Sarah," William said, his voice breaking. The woman stopped singing. She turned. Her face was Sarah Thorne's face, but wrong. The features were correct, but somehow off, as if rendered by an artist who worked from description rather than sight. The eyes were empty, not blind, but vacant, like windows looking into an abandoned house. When she smiled, it was a mechanical thing, a lifting of lips with no warmth behind it. "William?" she said. Her voice was Sarah's voice, but flattened, stripped of all the subtle music that makes a person's speech uniquely theirs. "You came." "Of course I came," William said, stepping toward her. "Sarah, what happened to you? Where have you been?" "Here," Sarah said simply. "I've been here. I've been waiting." "Waiting for what?" "For you," she said. "You left something undone, William. We left something undone. Don't you remember?" William's face crumpled. "The house," he whispered. "We were going to build a house, out past the common, on that plot we bought. We had the timber all ready, and then I died," Sarah finished. "And the house was never built. And now you're here, and we can build it together. We can finish what we started." She held out her hand. "No," Thomas said sharply, grabbing William's arm. "Don't touch her. That's not your wife." "She is," William insisted, trying to pull free. "That's Sarah. I'd know her anywhere." "Look at her eyes, man," Jacob Hart said. "Really look." William looked, and saw, and made a sound like a wounded animal. The thing wearing Sarah Thorne's face tilted its head, bird-like, studying them. "You all have unfinished business," it said in that too-flat voice. "All of you. That's why you came. That's why you'll stay." "We're leaving," Thomas said. "All of us. Now. Are you?" The Sarah thing smiled again. "Then go. But you'll be back. You'll all be back. Because you cannot finish what you started out there." She gestured vaguely toward where the city must be, though the trees blocked all view of it. "Out there, you grow old and die with things left undone. But here, you have forever. Here, you can work and work and work. And someday, you might finish. Isn't that better than dying with regrets?" "It's a lie," Peter Ashford said. His face was white, but his voice was steady. "That man Esther met, he's been building his house for God knows how long, and it's still just a frame. Nothing ever gets finished here. It's just eternal, futile work." The Sarah thing's smile didn't waver. "But at least it's work. At least it's purpose. What do you have out there? What do any of you have?" "Life," Thomas said. "However brief, however imperfect life." For a moment, the thing's expression flickered. Something moved behind those empty eyes. Confusion, perhaps, or even a distant echo of the woman Sarah Thorne had been. Then it was gone, and the mechanical smile returned. "William will stay," she said. "Won't you, William?" William Thorne stood frozen, his hand still half extended toward his dead wife. Tears ran down his face. He opened his mouth to speak, and Jacob Hart punched him. It was a solid blow, catching William on the jaw and dropping him like a felled tree. Jacob grabbed him under the arms and started dragging him backward. "Go," he snarled at the others. "Go now." They went. Thomas and Samuel grabbed William's legs, and they hauled him between them. Peter and the others followed, walking backward, keeping their eyes on the clearing. The Sarah thing watched them go with that same unsettling smile. "You'll be back," she called after them. "All of you. The woods are patient." They stumbled through the forest, half carrying William, following Samuel's marks back toward the edge. But the marks were wrong. They led in circles, doubling back on themselves, leading to clearings they hadn't passed through before. The woods had rearranged themselves. "We're lost," Benjamin Carr said, trying to keep the panic from his voice. "No," Thomas said, though he wasn't sure himself. "No, we need to... Father." The voice came from somewhere to their left. "Father, help me." Jacob Hart went rigid. "Michael," he breathed. "That's Michael. That's my brother." "It's not," Thomas said. "Jacob, you heard what that thing said." It's trying to butt. Jacob was already running toward the voice, and Joseph Mullins was running too, calling out for someone named Ann, and the group was fracturing, each man drawn by his own private grief toward whatever waited in the darkness between the trees. Thomas grabbed Peter Ashford's arm. "The edge," he said urgently. "Which way is the edge?" Peter pointed. "That way, I think." The light is slightly brighter. An explosion of sound erupted from deeper in the woods. A scream, human, male, abruptly cut off. Then silence. "Jacob?" Samuel whispered. "We can't help him," Thomas said, though the words tasted like ash. "We have to get out. We have to." A figure stumbled out of the trees ahead of them. For one horrible moment, Thomas thought it was another of those empty things. But no, it was Joseph Mullins, alive and terrified, blood running from a cut on his forehead. "They're not there," he gasped. "They're not. It's just trees. Just trees that look like people if you're not looking straight at them. And when you get close, He couldn't finish. "Where's Jacob?" William Thorne had regained consciousness and was staring around wildly. "Where's Benjamin?" "Gone," Joseph said flatly. "The woods took them." "Then we go back." "Gone," William said, struggling to his feet. "We get them back. We don't leave anyone. We leave," Thomas said, his voice like iron. "Or we all die here. Now move." They moved. 5 men, running now, abandoning stealth for speed. The trees seemed to close in around them, branches grasping like fingers. The light grew dimmer, not brighter. They were going deeper instead of getting out. And then, impossibly, they burst into daylight. They stumbled out of the woods into the meadow, the city visible in the distance. The sun still shone. It seemed to be the same time of day as when they had entered, though it felt like they'd been in the woods for hours. Thomas counted heads: himself, Samuel, Peter, Joseph, William. 5 men had come out. 7 had gone in. They walked back to the city in silence. People watched them pass, counting, seeing the empty spaces where Jacob Hart and Benjamin Carr should have been. No one asked questions. No one needed to. That night, Thomas Caldwell sat in his daughter's room. Esther sat across from him, her hands folded in her lap. For a long time, neither spoke. Finally, Esther said, "You saw, didn't you? You saw what it's like." "I saw," Thomas said. "And you understand now why I can't just forget, why I can't pretend it doesn't exist." "I understand," Thomas said. And then, after a pause, "Your mother's name was Margaret. She loved autumn best of all the seasons. She sang while she worked, usually off-key. She wanted to name you Esther because it means star, and she said you would be our light. She died bringing you into this world. and not a day has passed since that I haven't missed her." Esther's eyes filled with tears. "Thank you," she whispered. "That's finished now," Thomas said. "That story is complete, as much as it ever can be. You know her now. That debt is paid." Esther nodded, but they both knew it wasn't enough. There would always be something undone, some thread left hanging. That was the nature of life, and the woods would wait, patient and hungry, for the moment when the weight of the unfinished grew too heavy to bear. Outside, in the darkness, the forest dreamed its slow dreams. And in the depths of those woods, Jacob Hart and Benjamin Carr began their endless work. Winter came hard to New York that year. Snow fell in thick blankets, burying the city beneath white silence. The harbor froze solid enough for children to play on the ice. People huddled in their homes, burning what fuel they could afford, and spoke little of the woods that waited, patient and dark, beyond the northern edge of the city. Esther Caldwell did not go near the forest. She kept to the inn, helping her father with the business, reading by the fire, living a small and careful life. She finished things. Every task begun was completed. Every promise made was kept. She left no sentence half-spoken, no letter unwritten. She was meticulous about tying up loose ends. But the calling did not stop. It was worse. At night, she would lie in her bed and feel it like a physical pull, as if an invisible rope were tied around her chest, gently tugging. She dreamed of the woods, of walking between the massive trees, of finding a task waiting for her, some great work that only she could complete. She would wake with the smell of earth and decay in her nostrils, and it would be hours before the scent faded. Her father watched her with increasing concern. He saw how she grew thin, how shadows gathered beneath her eyes, how she startled at sudden sounds. He knew that whatever the woods had planted in her was growing, and he did not know how to cut it out. "We should leave," he said, one evening in January. They sat alone in the common room after the last patrons had left. Snow fell softly outside. Leave New York. Go south. Philadelphia, perhaps, or even farther. Charleston. Somewhere far from those damned woods. "It won't matter," Esther said quietly. "Distance won't change it. The woods aren't just a place, Father. They're something else, something older. They're wherever unfinished things are, wherever people carry regrets and incomplete tasks. We can't outrun them because we carry them inside us." "Then what do we do?" Thomas asked, and his voice cracked. "Tell me what to do, and I'll do it." Esther looked at him, this big rough man who had raised her alone, who had taught her to be strong and practical and brave. "I don't know," she said, and started to cry. That night, unable to sleep, Esther stood at her window and looked north toward the invisible woods. The city was dark. Most families abed. Snow continued to fall. And then she saw it, a figure walking through the snow-covered streets. It moved steadily, purposefully, heading north. As it passed beneath a window where lamplight spilled out, Esther caught a glimpse of its face, Jacob Hart, or what had been Jacob Hart. He walked with the same mechanical quality she had seen in the Sarah thing, his face empty, his movements stiff. He wore the same clothes he had worn the day he vanished into the woods, now tattered and stained. As Esther watched, he walked steadily northward, toward the forest, as if drawn by a string, and he was not alone. More figures emerged from doorways and alleys. People Esther didn't recognize vanished people, she realized, from weeks or months or even years ago. All of them walking with that same purposeful emptiness. They converged in the street below, a silent procession of the half-dead, all heading north. Esther's breath fogged the cold window. She should wake her father. She should sound an alarm. But instead, she found herself pulling on her cloak, lacing her boots, moving with the same dreamlike compulsion that seemed to grip the figures in the street. She stopped herself at the door to her room, hand on the latch. What was she doing? Was she really about to go out there? To follow those things back to the woods? Yes, whispered something deep. Inside her, yes, you are. Because you need to understand. Because you need to see. She went downstairs as quietly as she could. Her father's snoring rumbled from his room off the kitchen. She left him sleeping and slipped out into the winter night. The cold hit her like a fist. The snow had stopped and the sky was clear, stars blazing overhead with an intensity that seemed almost malicious. The procession of figures was moving steadily north, perhaps 20 or 30 of them, their footprints leaving a dark trail in the pristine snow. Esther followed at a distance, keeping to the shadows. No one else was abroad. The city slept, unaware of the parade of lost souls walking through its streets. Or perhaps people did see, from behind shuttered windows, but chose to turn away, to pull their blankets tighter and pretend they had seen nothing. The figures walked without speaking, without acknowledging one another. They were together but fundamentally alone, each trapped in their own private compulsion. Esther recognized more faces as they passed beneath occasional lamplight. There was John Wickham, the trapper who had vanished 3 years ago. There was Benjamin Carr, who had gone into the woods with her father's search party and never returned. There was a young woman Esther vaguely remembered from the market, and an old man who used to sell fish near the docks. They reached the edge of the city and kept walking. The meadow stretched white and empty before them, and beyond it, dark against the star-bright sky, stood the forest. Esther's feet kept moving, following the procession. The calling was stronger than it had ever been, a physical force pulling her forward. With each step, she felt her own will diminishing, like a candle flame guttering in the wind. Just a little farther, something whispered. Just a little farther, and you'll understand. Just a little farther, and you'll be home. The figures reached the forest edge and walked into the darkness, without hesitation. Esther stood at the boundary, trembling. The woods waited, patient and hungry. She could feel them reaching for her, could feel invisible hands pulling her forward. She took a step. Esther! The voice shattered the spell. She gasped, staggering as if she'd been struck. Behind her, running through the snow, came her father. He was in his nightshirt and boots, hatless, his breath coming in white plumes. Don't, he panted, reaching her and grabbing her shoulders. Don't go in there. Please. I have to, Esther heard herself say. Father, I have to. It's calling me. It won't stop until I answer. Then let it call, Thomas said fiercely. He pulled her against his chest, holding her tight. Let it call until the end of the world. You are my daughter. You are alive, and I will not lose you to that damned place. Esther sobbed against him. The pulling was so strong, like invisible hooks in her flesh, trying to drag her into the darkness. I don't know how to fight it, she whispered. I don't know how to make it stop. Thomas held her at arm's length, looking into her eyes. Then we don't fight it, he said. We end it. What? If the woods won't let go, Thomas said, His jaw set in that familiar stubborn line. Then we burn them down. The next morning, Thomas Caldwell called a town meeting. It took some doing. The city fathers were reluctant to gather in the dead of winter for what they saw as the ravings of a grief-mad innkeeper. But Thomas was persistent, and he had allies, the families of the vanished, the men who had gone into the woods and come back, changed. Slowly, reluctantly, people came. They gathered in the common room of the Caldwell Inn, packed shoulder to shoulder, breath steaming in the cold air despite the roaring fire. Thomas stood before them, his daughter at his side, and told them everything. He told them what Esther had seen in the woods. He told them about the search party, about the things that wore the faces of the dead, about Jacob Hart and Benjamin Carr, who had never returned. And he told them about last night, about the procession of empty-eyed figures, walking back to their prison of perpetual incompletion. The woods are not natural, he finished. They are not even alive, not in the way we understand life. They are a hunger, a need, a trap that feeds on regret and unfinished business, and they will keep taking our people until we stop them. How? Someone called from the back. How do you stop something like that? Fire, Thomas said simply. We burn the woods to the ground. Uproar. People shouted over one another, some in agreement, others in protest. Samuel Reed stood, calling for order. It's winter, he said when the noise died down. The trees are covered in snow and ice. They won't burn. Then we wait for spring, Thomas said. We wait until the snow melts and the wood is dry, and then we burn it all. Every tree, every branch, every root. We burn it until nothing remains but ash. And what about the people in there? A woman asked. Esther recognized her. Mary Ashford, Peter's sister. What about those who are trapped? If we burn the woods, we burn them too. They're already dead, Thomas said, and his voice was gentle but firm. I know that's hard to hear. God knows I wish it weren't true. But what's in those woods aren't our loved ones anymore. They're echoes, shadows, traps to lure more victims. If we want to save the living, we have to let go of the dead. Esther stepped forward. Every eye turned to her. She had been silent until now, but she could stay silent no longer. He's right, she said quietly. I've felt it, the pull of the woods. It gets stronger every day. And I saw them last night, the ones who are trapped there. They're not suffering, exactly, but they're not living either. They're caught in a moment, working at tasks that can never be completed, caught in a loop that never ends. That's not mercy. That's torture. She took a load, breath, steadying herself. My father wants to burn the woods to save me. But it's not just me. There are children in this city who will grow up with regrets, with unfinished things. There are young people who will make mistakes, leave things unsaid. Everyone has unfinished business. Everyone. And as long as those woods stand, they're in danger. We all are. Silence fell. People looked at one another, at their neighbors, at their children. Thomas could see the moment the truth of it landed, the realization that the woods threatened not just individuals, but the community itself, generation after generation. William Thorne stood. His face was gaunt, aged 10 years since his wife's death. I'll help, he said. Tell me what to do, and I'll do it. Others rose, adding their voices. Not everyone, some remained unconvinced. Others, too, frightened of disturbing something they didn't understand. But enough. Enough to make it possible. They planned through the winter. Thomas organized. Work parties, stockpiled axes and saws, made arrangements for oil and pitch. They would need to cut fire breaks to ensure the blaze didn't spread to the city. They would need to coordinate to burn it all at once before the woods could, what? Escape? Retaliate? No one was quite sure what the woods could or would do when threatened, but they prepared for the worst. Esther threw herself into the work. She helped organize supplies, copied out work schedules, calculated amounts of fuel needed. She finished things. She kept busy. And at night, when the calling grew strong, she would grip her father's hand and hold on until the pull subsided. The winter passed slowly. Snow fell and melted and fell again. The figures continued their nocturnal processions, walking from the city into the woods, always returning to their endless work. People learned to close their shutters at night, to not look out, to pretend they saw nothing. And then, finally, spring came. The snow melted. The ground softened. The trees began to bud, green life returning to the world. And the wood in the forest, which had seemed immune to decay, began to dry in the spring sun. On a clear day in April, when the wind blew from the south and the sky was blue and innocent, they gathered at the forest edge. Nearly 100 people, carrying torches and determination. They had spent the morning dousing the forest perimeter in oil, had cut wide fire breaks on 3 sides, leaving only the north open where there was nothing but wilderness for miles. Thomas Caldwell stood before the assembled crowd, a torch in his hand. Esther stood beside him, holding her own torch. The flames guttered in the breeze. "Are we sure about this?" Peter Ashford asked. He looked nervous. They all did. "No," Thomas said honestly, "but we're doing it anyway." He looked at his daughter. Esther nodded. Together, they touched their torches to the oil-soaked brush. The flames caught with a whoosh, racing along the perimeter, faster than a man could run. Within moments, the forest edge was alight, fire climbing the trunks of the ancient trees, spreading from branch to branch. The oil-fed flames burned hot and fast, and the dry wood caught readily despite the spring dampness. Smoke rose in great black columns. The fire roared, a living sound that drowned out all other noise. People backed away from the heat, shielding their faces. The flames were already spreading deeper into the woods, moving from tree to tree with terrible efficiency. For a moment, nothing happened. The fire simply burned, consuming wood, as fire does. Perhaps, Esther thought, they had been wrong. Perhaps the woods were just woods after all, and they were burning nothing but trees. Then the screaming started. It came from deep within the burning forest, not human screams, but something older, something that predated human language. It was the sound of rage and pain, and something that might have been fear. The trees themselves seemed to writhe in the flames, their branches twisting and reaching like grasping hands, and figures began to emerge from the fire. They came stumbling out of the smoke and flame, the vanished people, the trapped ones, the unfinished things. But they were different now. The empty calm was gone, replaced by panic, by terror, by something that might have been awareness. They ran from the flames, their clothes smoking, their faces twisted in anguish. "Help them!" someone shouted, starting forward. "No!" Thomas grabbed the man's arm. "Don't touch them. Don't let them touch you." He was right. As the figures emerged from the fire, they began to dissolve. Their forms came apart like smoke, like shadows fleeing from light. Some made it only a few steps before dissipating entirely. Others made it farther, reaching toward the living people with desperate hands before crumbling into ash. Esther watched as the Sarah thing came stumbling out of the flames. For just a moment, The empty eyes seemed to fill with something recognition, perhaps, or gratitude. Then it fell to its knees and came apart, scattering on the wind like dandelion seeds. More figures emerged and dissolved. John Wickham, Benjamin Carr, Jacob Hart, the young couple, the old woman, all the lost and trapped, finally, terribly free. The fire burned for 3 days. They took shifts watching it, making sure it didn't spread beyond the fire breaks, making sure it burned completely. The spring rains that came on the second day weren't enough to stop it. The woods burned with an intensity that seemed to defy nature, as if they wanted to be consumed, as if they were eager to finally end. On the third day, the flames died to embers. On the fourth day, nothing remained but ash and charred stumps. The great forest, the vanishing wood, the place of unfinished things, was gone. In its place was a blackened wasteland, still smoking, lifeless and clean. Esther stood at the edge of the burn scar, her father beside her. The calling was gone. The pull, the whisper, the sense of belonging to that dark place, all of it had burned away with the trees. She felt lighter than she had in months, as if invisible chains had been struck from her limbs. "Is it finished?" she asked quietly. Thomas put his arm around her shoulders. "Yes," he said, "it's finished." They walked back to the city together. Behind them, the blackened earth slowly cooled. In time, new growth would come, grass first, then bushes, eventually new trees. But they would be normal trees, innocent of the dark hunger that had dwelt there before. The trap was broken. The curse was ended. That night, Esther slept without dreaming. 10 years later, on a warm summer evening, Esther Caldwell, now Esther Reed, having married Samuel's son, stood in her garden watching her children play. The boy was 5, the girl 3, both of them laughing as they chased fireflies in the gathering dusk. The city had grown. Where the burned forest had stood, there were now farms and orchards. The land was fertile, the crops abundant. No one spoke of the vanishing wood anymore, except sometimes, late at night, in taverns, as a story told to frighten or amaze. Her father had died the previous winter, peacefully, in his sleep. She missed him terribly, but she had been there at the end, had held his hand, and told him she loved him, had made sure he left nothing unsaid. That story, at least, was complete. She called her children inside as the stars began to appear. The boy complained, wanting to catch just one more firefly. The girl yawned and rubbed her eyes. Normal children, with normal complaints, facing a normal future. As Esther closed the door, she glanced north, toward where the forest had once stood. In the distance, she could see the dark line of new trees, young growth reclaiming the burned land. They were just trees, nothing more. But sometimes, on quiet nights, when the wind blew from the north, she thought she could hear it, a faint whisper, a distant calling, an echo of the hunger that had once dwelt there. Not strong enough to trap anymore, not strong enough to hold, but there nonetheless, a memory, a warning, a reminder that some things, no matter how completely they are destroyed, leave traces, scars, echoes. But Esther had learned to live with echoes. She finished her work each day. She kept no secrets from those she loved. She left nothing important unsaid, and when the whisper came on the north wind, she simply closed her windows and went on with her life. The vanishing wood was gone, but the lesson it had taught remained. Finish what you start. Say what needs saying. Live without regret. Because somewhere, in the dark places between things, the woods are always waiting, always patient, always hungry, and always, eternally, unfinished. And so ends our tale of the Vanishing Wood. But before you go, I have a question for you. What would your unfinished business be? What task, left, incomplete, might call you back from beyond? Share your thoughts in the comments below if you dare. If this story sent chills down your spine, please give it a thumbs up and subscribe for more tales from the shadows. There are so many dark stories waiting to be told, and I'd love to have you join me for the next one. To those of you who shared where you're listening from, thank you. Whether you're alone in the darkness of Tokyo, walking the foggy streets of London, or tucked safely in bed in New York itself, know that these stories connect us across time and distance. Remember, finish what you start. Say what needs saying. Leave nothing undone. Because somewhere, in the spaces between things, something is always waiting. Until next time, sleep well if you can.